Hi there, this is Unmesh from PiXimperfect, and today I'm going to share with you one of the most realistic ways to blend the elements of a composite using a special technique called the inverse curve technique. Now, using this technique, we will be creating realistic highlights and shadows, and that too colorful. So without any further ado, let's get started. Back in the magical world of Photoshop, and here we have a background, and on top of that we have a subject. I've already masked it out to save time. Now if you want to download the starting PSD just like this, check the links in the description. Now the first thing we would do right here is to match the brightness, but right now the colors might be distracting us. So how do we take the colors away? By creating a luminosity check layer. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose solid color and choose any shade of gray, white or black will do too. Hit OK and then change the blend mode to color. That will take away all the colors. Now all you need to do now is to create a curves adjustment layer above the subject layer. So with the subject layer selected, click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. Now inside of curves, all we got to do right here is to darken it. Now if we do anything right here, it affects the entire thing. We want it to be limited just to the subject. And how do we do that? By creating a clipping mask by simply clicking on this button right there. This limits the curve, as you can see right there, this arrow. It limits the curve just to the subject. Now let's darken the subject accordingly. This seems to be about right. We can always get back to that, edit this later as well. Let's take a look. Here's the before, here's the after. It seems to be matching more. Now you can take away or turn off the luminosity check layer. By the way, if you want to learn more about check layers, do watch this video. Now it's time for us to begin matching the colors. But before we go ahead and start painting the highlights and the shadows and all of that fancy stuff, we need to create a nice base. And what is a nice base? Something that would go with the background a little more. So first of all, let's create a gradient map. So click on the adjustment layer icon again and then choose gradient map. This will help us match the atmosphere. Now what does the gradient map do? It maps the colors of highlights, midtones and shadows according to the colors we choose. For example, right now on the right hand side we have black. So the highlights are painted in black and the shadows are painted in white, because on the left hand side we have white. So single click on it. You can choose whatever color you want. So for the highlights right now we have green and the shadows we have red, and in between we can add as many colors as we want. But we want the colors on the subject to be similar to the background. So we will go that route. So for now, let's hit cancel. And first of all, let's limit the gradient map just to the subject by holding the Alt key or the Option key and clicking on the line between these two layers. That also creates a clipping mask, and clicking on this button also does the same thing. So again, we need to select the icon, the symbol of the gradient map, not the mask. Otherwise, it will only sample colors from the mask, which is white. So select the symbol right there, single click on the gradient, and then just make sure sample all layers or current and below is selected. Also, you want sample size to be 3x3 or 5x5 so that it samples an average color of that area, not a particular pixel. So let's zoom in and sample a highlight color for the highlights. So click on the rightmost slider, click on the color, and you can sample whatever color you want from the background. So I'm going to choose one of the highlights from the light because that's the source of light in the background. So let's click on that. That's pretty good. You can add a little bit of saturation to it. Hit OK. For the darkest spot, single click on it, single click on the color, and let's sample the darkest color in the background. So according to me, let's sample one of these colors, very close to black. Hit OK. Now we're going to choose a midtone. Let's assume that these areas are gray in real life and it's just taking the colors of this light. So we're going to create a point, a slider right here, and single click on the color and pick on, just select one of these colors. Now keep in mind, the brightness level of this is 53. Absolutely close to the midtones. Hit OK. But if you want to be absolutely precise, you can just set the location to 53 as well. And by chance, we had that location already selected. Now, if you want a darker shade here as well, so let's click to add one more slider and single click on the color. And let's choose this. For this one, the brightness level was 18. So hit OK. And let's choose the location to be 18. Okay. That seems to be about right. But let's take a look at the subject, how it does. So it looks fine, but we can make some adjustments here and there. So let's take the slider a little bit more to the left and the middle one a little bit more to the left as well. Adds a little bit of highlights there as well. Now it matches very well, but of course it's all blue. We don't want to turn it into avatar. So let's decrease the opacity to about 50%. See, that forms a nice base. Now let's add one more curves adjustment layer just to, blend the image a little bit more. This is not painting highlights or shadows, just a little bit blending. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. And we want a little bit blues in the highlights. So we're going to go to the blue channel right over there and let's add a little bit of blues in the highlights. but it's affecting the background as well. We want it to be affecting the subject. So click on this button. Don't forget to clip it. So let's add a little bit of blues and let's go to the red channel. Now we want to add a little bit cyan to the highlights. Now cyan is the opposite of red. So we need to decrease the reds to bring up the cyans. So let's decrease the reds a bit. See, it's getting a little closer. Now you can play with the green and see what they do. Let's increase it just a bit and see how it is. So let's take a look at the before and after. So here is the before, here is the after. Look how much more it matches. Before, after. We are definitely getting closer. Looking at it now, I feel like we added a little too much cyan, and that, my friend, is the advantage of adjustment layers, that you can adjust it later. So double click on the symbol to open up the properties. So let's go to the red channel and decrease it just a bit, and let's go to the green channel and just adjust it accordingly. See what feels good to you. Just a little bit. So I'm going to select that, and you can also move it with the arrow keys to make slight adjustments. Okay, now definitely, as with every adjustment, and we are humans, we tend to go a little bit overboard. So let's decrease the opacity of this one as well to about 45%, and that looks a little more natural. I would highly recommend that you go ahead and take a break. Maybe drink coffee, tea, whatever you like. Maybe watch the sunset, watch the sky, go out in nature. Just do something that relaxes you and then get back to the image. You might be able to find some mistake that might have been overlooked otherwise. Now I can see that it should have been a little flatter. There's a little too much highlights more than required, which might not give us enough room to paint in the highlights manually. So we'll go to the gradient map properties by double clicking on the symbol and single clicking on the gradient and move it a little bit to the right. See what it does? Yes, it makes it a little more flatter. If we take this to the right, that would add too much shadows to it. That seems to be about right. Let's take it a little more towards the right. That's perfect. Now, here we are. This is much better. Now, it's finally time for us to move on to the inverse curve technique. Now, to be able to understand how the inverse curve technique works, we need to create a brand new curves adjustment layer. So select the topmost layer, not the luminosity check. Let's delete it. Let's not confuse things. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. All right. And this time, instead of brightening the highlights, this is how we usually brighten the highlights, right? So we click a point on the right hand side and we take it up, or we take the rightmost point a little bit to the left. This just brightens the highlights. That's what we do. Some other times when we want to brighten something, we create a point in the middle and then take it up. Sometimes, very rarely, when we want to brighten the shadows, we create a point on the left hand side and then take it up, and probably create a point on the right and bring it down to not brighten the highlights. But what if I told you that in this example, we're going to take the leftmost point and take it up to paint in the highlights? That would be some interesting stuff, isn't it? Why would we do that, you might ask? Well, for extreme composites, this is important because this gives you absolute freedom. Let's say we created a point even a little bit on the left, right? And then took down the highlights, right? And we want to brighten this area. So first of all, select the mask of the curves, press Ctrl or Command I. Also, we want to limit the curves just to the subject. So we will click on this button. It will create a clipping mask. Take the brush and select white as the foreground color. Make sure flow and opacity at 100. Let's decrease the brush size. And no matter how much you paint right here with white, it just won't be brightened enough, right? So even here in the absolute dark areas, no matter how much you paint, it just won't brighten much, right? This doesn't give you absolute freedom. However, if you do it the other way, if you take the extreme left point up, look, even those areas are being brightened. Now it does come with its own problems because every area is being brightened. You have to be extra careful while painting the highlights. So let's move on to painting the highlights. We're going to create a brand new curves just to not confuse you. So first, we will click on the adjustment icon and then choose curves. We're going to name this highlights. So double click on the text and let's name this. We also want to limit it to the subject. So click on this button right there. Now take the leftmost point up. Just brighten stuff just like this. But we not only want to brighten it, we also want to create a colorful highlight. How do we do that again? Channels, my friend. So let's first of all go to the blue channel because we want to match it with that of the background. We want to match it with the source light. So let's take up blues again. We are not adding blues in the highlights. We are just doing the opposite of it. And that's why it's called the inverse curve. So let's take it up right there. We can always adjust this later. Let's go to the red channel now. We also want to add a little cyan to it, bring up a little cyan. So we will decrease the reds like this. That seems to be okay. Also, we can play with the green, but in this case, I don't feel like adding or playing with the green in a little bit. This seems to be a very right formula for a great highlight. Now keep in mind, you can start painting the highlight right now, and anytime you want to just adjust the colors, you can always just go to the channels and then just adjust it to your desire. There you go. Now, before we start painting the highlights, there's one more thing we need to do. We need to understand the fact that not all of us are Leonardo da Vinci's, right? We also need to understand the fact that we don't have the whole lifetime to just paint the highlights. We need something to help us with it, and that is the blend-if. Blend-if will help us take away the highlights from extremely dark areas, like absolutely dark areas. So double click on the right hand side of the layer, just take it away from extremely dark areas by taking the slider of the underlying layer from left to right. But this is harsh, right? So hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on the slider to break it apart and take it apart. For me, about 0.40 looks good. If you're satisfied, just hit OK. You can now start painting the highlights. First of all, select the mask, press Ctrl or Command I, choose the brush, make sure you have chosen the soft round brush. Keep the flow lower, 5/4, something like that would be great. I'm going to keep it at 4 and then just zoom in and start painting the highlights. Now, where to paint, you might ask? Great question, and the most important question of this lesson. We need to paint on every area that faces the light, not just the edges. So it's not like we're just painting right here and adding highlights. That looks good. That looks realistic. However, we also need to paint on areas that face the light, even if it is not on the edge. For example, have a look at this area, this hand right there. It also faces the light. There's a light right here. There might be a light, street light, that is out of the frame of the camera. So we need to paint a little bit right here as well. So you understand right now where we need to paint. Similarly, have a look at this area. This area faces the light and might face a light that is ahead, forward. So I'm going to paint a little bit right here. I'm painting very fast, along a little bit on the edge, maybe a little bit on the edge right there. This is a fast work. We have to take our time to do it slowly. Have a look. Just a little bit of this. Add a little bit glare around the edges right here as well. Just a little glare here as well, you know, around the face. This really adds a lot. Let's take a look at the before and after. Just doing this, 5 seconds of this. Here's the before, here's the after. Just look at the difference. Now we are going to speed it up, otherwise it would be absolutely boring. We'll talk about shadows later. Just keep in mind while you are painting the highlights, for example, right here, keep in mind the folds. Just don't paint a straight blob with this brush. Please don't do something like this. That would be childish. Doesn't look right. Keep in mind the folds. So according to the folds, you would just brighten. So there's folds right there. So you would brighten this way. And according to the folds, just let the brightness flow, just as it would in real life. See how better that one is in comparison to previous one. So keep in mind the folds. And still, if it doesn't look right, you can always double click on the right hand side of the layer and take it even further to help you more with painting the highlights. You can take it as high as 0.50 in this case. So we're going to keep it at 0.50 right there and hit OK. Now let's start painting the highlights. I still feel like there's too much blue in the face, so let's go back to the gradient map and decrease its opacity to about 44. How do you feel about that? That looks a lot better. Now let's get back to painting the highlights. Select the mask and resume painting. So there you go, as you can see, we have finished painting the highlights. Let's take a look at the before and after. So this is the before and this is the after. Isn't that a massive difference? Let's do it once again. Let's zoom in and do it. Here is the before, here is the after. Now when I look at it, I feel like that this should have been a little less brighter, maybe with more blues. So double click on the symbol of the curve and just take down the leftmost point. See, it makes it a little more bluer and more exciting. Let's zoom out and do a proper adjustment. So earlier it was something like this, which is good too. But if we take it down just slightly, it makes it a little more bluer. You can also adjust the blues now. So let's go to the blue channel and take it up and down and see what changes it makes. So if we take it up, it matches it a little more, I feel, in my opinion. Okay, there you go. Let's take a look right now at the before and after. So this is the before and this is the after. Now let's take a short break from the inverse curve technique and let's add some rim lighting. So if we zoom in, what if we add a little bit of light, more light around the edge, and this time we only want to brighten the highlights. So we don't have to do the inverse curve thing all over again. Just add one more. You already might have guessed it, curves, and this time just create a point in the middle and take it up. Just like this. If you want, you can go to the blue channel and increase the blues as well, something like that. And we only want to add it around the edge, and that too automatically. But before that, let's limit it just to the subject. So hold the Alt key or the Option key and click on the line between these two. Next thing we will do is hold the Control or Command and click on the mask of the subject layer. We just want a selection of the subject. Now, we want to contract the selection a little bit. All right. So to contract the selection, let's go to Select, Modify, and then Contract. Let's try 2 pixels. Let's see what it does. So 2 pixels contraction, a rim light of this, how would it look? Maybe we would want more. Let's go to Select, Modify, and then Contract one more time. And let's choose 1 this time. If this doesn't work, we will try some other values. Now, all you gotta do is to fill this with black. So with the mask selected, make sure that the foreground color is black and then press Alt Backspace. In a Mac, that would be Option Delete. Now let's take a look. Press Ctrl or Command D to deselect. We have added some rim lighting, but it's very, very harsh. We need to soften it up a little bit. So select the mask and open up the mask properties by clicking on the properties button. If you cannot see it, go to Window and then make sure properties is checked and just increase the feather. Have a look at it right now. Let's set it to 2.5. That seems to be a good number. Now let's take a look, and the rim lighting looks amazing. Let's add a little more feather, see how that looks. So here's the before, here's the after, just a little bit of light. I'm gonna stick to 2.5, that looks good, and only add it in certain areas, not all the areas. So select the mask right here, take the brush, make it a little larger, and just paint away the areas where we don't want it. Increase the flow to about 100, and paint black in these areas where you don't want it. This area is fine, little bit there is good. Now I want to remove it just so slightly right over here. So let's decrease the flow to about 10%. And then let's paint this area with black to remove it from there. Okay, there you go. Let's take a look at the before and after. So let's zoom out a bit. So here is the before, here is the after. Just a little bit of rim lighting goes a long way. Of course, we forgot to do it right here. So select the mask and then just erase it at the bottom right here. Let's increase the flow. There you have it, my friend. A little bit of rim lighting. Here's the before, here's the after. Just add a little oomph to the photo. Now let's get back to the mood for the inverse curve technique. And now we're gonna just paint in the shadows. So we'll do just the opposite. So let's create a curves adjustment layer again. You know what? This video should be named the infinity curve. Let's get back to it. So instead of creating a point in the left in the shadow area and then making it darker, we will make the highlights darker. Take the extreme right point and take it down. Just as we did with the highlights, we did just the opposite. We took the extreme left point and took it up. Similarly in the shadows, just the opposite, extreme right point and take it down. Also, we want to limit it to the subject, so click on this button to create a clipping mask and then select the mask, press Ctrl or Command I, and then you can start painting the shadows. By the way, to momentarily turn off the mask and see how dark your shadow is going to go, hold the Shift key and then click on the mask to momentarily turn it off and come back to the properties of the curve. And we're going to make it dark, like really, really dark. Something like this looks good. Okay, if you want to add some color to it, you can. We can go to the blue channel and add some blues to it. but I feel like I wouldn't add much color to the shadow, just a little bit of blue, and probably in the red channel we'll just take it down a bit, just like that, and enable the mask again by holding the shift key and clicking on the mask. Just select it, take the brush, let's set the flow at about 3 or 4. So I'm gonna set it to 3 and begin painting the shadows. Make sure the foreground color is white. Now again you might ask, Unmesh, where should I paint in the shadows? Brilliant question. Similarly as we did with the highlights, we painted on the areas which faced the light. We will paint the shadows in areas that do not face the light. As simple as that. So let's resume painting. So there you go, we have finished painting the shadows. Let's take a look. Here is the before and here is the after. That's a massive difference, my friends. Now painting the shadow was not as difficult as painting the highlights. Highlights is where all the hard work takes place. You know what? We are pretty much done. Now all we have to do is to just some finishing adjustments. So let's add one more. You have already guessed it. Just one more curves to blend it in a little bit more. So we will limit it as well by creating a clipping mask. And then let's increase the blues a little more. First, we'll just make it a little darker to match it even more. So let's take the rightmost point down just like this. See, it's matching a little more. So slowly and gradually take it down to match it. Now let's go to the blue channel and increase it just a bit. This value seems to resonate with me. With the green channel, we're gonna try to take it down and take it up. See what works best for us. Just a touch of it. Let's get back to the RGB channel. If you want to add more cyan, again, go to the red channel and let's try decreasing that. See, it's matching a little more. There you go. This was just for blending in a little bit. So here is the before, here is the after, just blends in a little more. Now, if you zoom into the subject, there is an issue. There's a lot of noise in the background, but there's no noise on the subject. So we need to add noise to it. Press Ctrl-Shift-N, Command-Shift-N on a Mac and change the blend mode to overlay. Make sure you check fill with overlay neutral color so that it fills the layer already with 50% gray. And overlay is a blend mode which hides 50% gray. And we're gonna name this noise. Okay. We also want to limit it to the subject. Hold the Alt key or the Option key. Click on the line between these two layers. Let's go to filter and convert for smart filters. Hit OK. So that whatever filter we add, we can change the values later. Let's go to filter, noise, and then add noise. And make sure monochromatic is checked. We don't want to add too much color to it. Slowly and gradually increase the noise to the point where it matches with that of the background. In my opinion, I'm going to keep it a little bit higher first. Let's keep it at about 25 in the beginning. Now we need to add some blur to it. This is very sharp noise. So let's go to filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur. 0.6, 0.7 works in this case. So let's go for 0.6. How does it match up? Not pretty well. Let's go for 0.5. Okay, now we only want noise in the shadow areas. So we will just double click on the right hand side of the layer. That's how noise works. So hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on the rightmost slider of the underlying layer section and take half all the way to the left. This takes away the noise from the highlights. Hit OK. Take a look. Here's the before, noise is in the highlights. Here's the after. It gets slightly better. Now I feel like the blur should have been a little less. So I'm going to decrease the blur to about 0.4 and also the noise should have been a little less. Double click on add noise and you can change the values right here. So we can change it to about 15. How do you feel about that? 15 looks a little better and it just kind of blends well. And on top of that, you can always take down the opacity and slowly and gradually increase it and stop at just the point where it looks good. So in my opinion, we're going to keep it at about 55. One of the things we do while creating a composite is adding a global effect at the end. What it does is that it allows us to blend all of the elements of the composite together. It's just kind of a final bringing together effect. So in this case, we're going to add a color lookup table. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose color lookup. And this is something we apply to all the elements. In this case, both to the subject and the background. So we're going to choose teal orange plus contrast. This is a very exciting one, but of course this is too much. So let's get the opacity to about 35%. That looks good, or maybe 30%, whatever suits you. So we're going to keep it at about 30. Also now, if you look at this image, it's just too dark. We need to add some brightness to it. But if we add a simple, again, curve and just take it up, it's also going to blow out the details in the highlights. It's kind of too much. So what we can do though, we can just take it even more and only brighten up the shadow areas by double clicking on the right hand side of the layer. By the way, this looks great as well. So double click on the right hand side of the layer and take it away from the highlights by taking the slider of the underlying layer from right to left. Of course, it's harsh. So hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on it to break it apart and take both the halves to the extremes. So hit OK. Let's take a look. Here is the before, here is the after. That makes a ton of difference, my friend. You can always get back to the properties and let's decrease it a bit. I think it's too much. So let's decrease it just a bit and this looks perfect. Now, if you want to add some overlays, you're always free to do so. So I have some light leaks that I downloaded from Envato Elements, the link to which are in the description. By the way, I have offers in Envato Elements as well that will give you 75-ish discount for the first month. It's like for a fixed fee, you can download all of their assets, as many as you want. You don't have to pay for each and every one of them. So here are a lot of light leaks that we can use. So I'm just going to select this one, Light Leaks 2, and drag it and drop it over the canvas. This looks interesting. Let's make it a little larger. Adjust it like that. Hit enter and change the blend mode to screen. There you go. That's fun too as well. And you can finish right here. But wait, there is a mistake we still need to fix. Let's turn it off. This was optional. If you zoom in, everything looks fine. However, what if we wanted to add a depth of field? Have a look at the subject. These areas are out of focus. The mouth and the face is in focus. This area is out of focus, even in the subject. So how can the background be so tack sharp? It is just not possible, right? So we need to add some background blur to it. So we're going to make a copy of the background. So with the background layer selected, press Ctrl or Command J just to have a backup, and then go to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, hit OK so that we can change the values later. Now let's go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and Tilt Shift. Now Tilt Shift allows us to add blur gradient in all different directions. So we're going to bring it down and start the solid line where she must be standing. So, and we're going to bring the dotted line all the way far. We're going to create one more point right here by clicking, and we will just rotate it 90 degrees and take it far as well and bring a gradient something like this, and add one more point right here as well and rotate it 90 degrees. There you go. The solid line is where the blur starts. So that's where the blur is 0. And the dotted line is where the blur gradually increases to whatever value you choose, 15. So blur is 0 right here. From 0, slowly and gradually it will increase to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And it will end at 15 right over here. Hope that makes sense. Now, let's just control how much blur you want right here in the background. So we will keep it at about 10. For now, you can always change things later. Now, before you hit OK, now keep in mind, we have added a little noise on the subject. We need to add a little bit noise on the background as well, just to match things up, because some areas like this have noise. So to match things up, just click on the noise button right there and just increase the amount. You can also control the size of the noise, but this one seems to be good. You can always control these things according to your taste. But in my opinion, this looks good to me. Hit OK. And there you have a little bit of background blur, and we have our image ready. If you want to make it absolutely shallow depth of field, you are welcome to do that as well. So there you go. Here, my friend, is the before, and this is the after. So just to wrap it up, all you have to do is to first create a base. Now, how do you create a base? There are lots of ways. Just look at the image, look at what it needs. In this example, we first matched the brightness, because have a look at it. The brightness is not at all matching, and you can create a luminosity check layer for that. So we matched the brightness, and then we were to match the colors. To match the atmosphere, we created a gradient map and created a similar gradient to that of the background and just slapped on the subject. And then we added one more curves to match it even more. Added some blues, reduced some reds, just to bring it more closer to the background. And then came the inverse curve technique. So if you want to add highlights, all you have to do is to do the opposite. Take the extreme left or the shadows up, and then combine the RGB channels to add some color to it, and just begin painting the highlights. Don't forget to blend if, right? You need to apply blend if to take it away from extremely dark areas. So similarly, we will do the opposite with the shadows. Also, there's one more thing we did. We added some rim lighting. We just made a selection, brought it in, and just painted around the edges, filled around the edges. And after that, one more curve to blend all in a little more. And the background had a little noise, so we added a little noise on the subject as well. Color lookup table on top of everything. Global effect to bring all the elements of a composite together. And then just a little curve to brighten it up. This was a dark image, and light leaks is optional. And don't forget, we can always add a little depth to the image by blurring the background. It's not always necessary, but in this case, if you have a look at the subject, some areas were blurred, some areas were out of focus. So definitely we can tell the subject was captured with a shallow depth of field. So we had to add a little blur to the background. Even if you have a look at the original image of the subject, just the subject, see, it had a shallow depth of field. So we had to do that with the existing background as well. And on top of that, you can add some light leaks if you wish to. So that's pretty much it for this video. This was a little longer one, but I hope it helped. This was something that you kept on requesting even when I created a poll and asked you what you wanted. A lot of you guys said you want more compositing videos, so there it is. Thank you so much for watching, and I would like to take this moment to thank all these nice and amazing people for supporting PiXimperfect on Patreon and helping keep PiXimperfect free for everybody forever. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in my next one. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.